Wendy said, good morning, afternoon, evening. We are thrilled to have you join us for Optimizing Value, Getting the Most from Your MBA Experience. We're going to spend a little bit of time with you today and hopefully give you some value in being able to anticipate what you are going to be thinking about as you roll up to your MBA experience. I should mention that we're going to be using the Q&A feature of Zoom. So as you have questions, you don't need to wait at all. You can put questions right into the Q&A section in Zoom, and we'll be able to see that. And that will be helpful because we are going to do a Q&A section a little bit later on.
Great.
So Wendy, before we talk about Fortuna, do you want to just say a quick hello?
Sure. I'm Wendy Metter, and I'm former Associate Director of Student Life at Kellogg.
And I'm Michael Malone, former Managing Director for Careers at Kellogg and former Associate Dean at Columbia. We'll share a little bit more about our backgrounds in just a minute, but I wanted to share first a little bit about Fortuna Admissions. Our team is comprised of over 35 folks who have worked at top business schools in a number of capacities. Each one of them has a touch point to admissions. So we have former admissions directors, folks who really understand the inside of the admissions process and understand how the process at each of these schools works. But we also have folks who have been in leadership positions in careers, in student affairs, and other areas within top business schools. And what we hope this brings to you is a very well-rounded skill set to be able to help you to navigate each stage of the MBA process. If you're interested in learning more, if you wanted to do a free consultation with Fortuna, you can go to the website here at fortunaadmissions.com and we can set you up with a free conversation to determine if it's an organization that you'd like to work with.
Amazing group of people.
So let's start out. Maybe we can share a little bit about each other. Wendy, I'd love if you could maybe tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background. And if you could, can you share with our audience your favorite business book?
Well, thank you for asking. I'll answer that second question first because it's a great book. It's a fun book, and I recommend everybody read it. Prior to embarking on your business school experience. It's called How to Wash a Chicken. It's a memorable name. It's written by a renowned faculty member at Kellogg his name is Tim Calkins, and he's a marketing faculty member. And it's really this incredibly clever book about how to make sort of the best in class business presentation. So it's not only something that you'll enjoy during your MBA experience, but throughout your career. So highly recommend that. Secondly, as I said earlier, I'm Wendy Metter. I was at Kellogg for 20 plus years. I started out doing admissions interviews and spent the majority of my time at Kellogg as the Associate Director of Student Life. And in that role, I oversaw clubs, conferences, generally student activities, community engagement, really the entire life cycle of the student experience. And one of my favorite things that I did was I was the career coach for the significant other community. So Kellogg student partners who were joining them on their journey and provided a full range of career services for them.
So you covered like everything that's offered in the MBA experience, including working with significant others.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful ride. And what about you, Michael?
So I'll also start with that second question first. My favorite business book is a book called Becoming a Manager by Linda Hill. She's an HBS professor. And what I loved about this book is that it gave sort of a theoretical foundation for moving from the line into management, but it also gave very concrete steps that somebody new to management can take in order to make their staffs feel seen and heard and valued. And I just thought it was such a thoughtful work, recognizing that being a manager is a totally different skill set than being on the line, and that oftentimes folks are underprepared making that transition. And so she really tried to highlight elements that people can focus on when they are new to management in order to start well. So I really appreciated this book, Becoming a Manager by Linda Hill. So my background is similar to yours, Wendy, in that I've done a little bit of a lot of different things. My first touch point to MBAs was actually as an outside reader for application reader for admissions at Columbia, and then later at UC Berkeley at Haas. But then I started a journey and spent time working in career management, doing business development, and then overseeing career ed and advising at Columbia. I then had the opportunity to go to Kellogg, which is where Wendy and I got to meet, and oversaw career management at Kellogg before returning back to Columbia, where I was asked to become the associate dean, overseeing student affairs, admissions, and financial aid for both full-time and executive MBAs. Then I later on had the opportunity to work with MS and PhD programs at the business school. So kind of like you, I feel like I've seen a little bit of a lot of different things in the business school realm.
Talk about a full range of activities.
Indeed, and I'm hoping that between the two of us, we can answer the questions that are going to come up tonight. So we're looking forward to your questions, folks.
Great.
So we have a number of things that we're going to spend some time on. And again, this is with the lens of helping you to be as best prepared as you can as you make the transition from applicant to accepted to then entering your MBA program in the not so distant future. There were 3 areas that we identified, and these areas, academics, community, and careers, when Wendy and I were talking about what's most important for folks to think about, these were the 3 areas that really stood out to us because it really encompasses the experience. But it's also important to note that if any one of those elements, academics, or community and family, or careers, is somewhat out of sync or out of balance, it really can have an impact on the other areas. So this is where we felt like it was helpful to start the conversation is just looking at these buckets of academics, community, and careers.
Absolutely. And just a note, the size of the gear have nothing to do necessarily with the importance of those things. They all really have to work together. And on that same point, when you're talking about preparation, I think the really important thing is that you have a balanced experience and that you are very intentional about the experience that you are about to have. And as much of these things that you can consider and think about ahead of time, the more prepared you will be and the better your experience will be. So let's move on to talk a little bit about what people should be thinking about as they embark upon this very big and exciting journey.
Yeah.
Michael.
I'm sorry, Wendy, I lost you. Can you say what you said
sure.
again, please?
I just said, what are, as people are beginning to prepare for this very important journey, what are some of the things that they can do to get started?
Yeah, you bet. It's a great question. I think there's a sort of an overarching thing that I'd like folks to pay a little bit of attention to. And this is no different than the organizations that you likely work for right now. And that's this, is that you want to work for an organization that has a vision and a mission established so that you have a good understanding for what your organization stands for, why it exists in the first place. That's its mission. And you're using that mission to then determine how you're going to act. And you want to act in a way that's consistent with the mission. So I mention this because this is fairly common in the business realm, that organizations have a vision, a mission, and then action plans. What we're going to encourage you to think about is doing this for yourself, for you to develop and identify your own personal mission, particularly as it pertains to your beginning your MBA career. So identifying what you stand for, what's important to you, I think is a great starting point. It will help you to drive and to shape not only the rest of your pre-MBA experience, but I think that it will help you to get the most value out of the MBA experience. And I think that the contrast to that is if you don't have a mission identified, I think you run a risk of approaching things in a very reactive, disjointed, sort of follow the herd way. And I think we both believe that you can do better if you are more strategic and if you have a sense for what you stand for.
Absolutely. So practically speaking, Michael, how can people begin to think about their personal mission?
Yeah. So there's an exercise that I would love for folks to do, and you can do it with us while you're listening in. The exercise is called the 6-word memoir. And the 6-word memoir is meant to help you to identify the single thing that you believe in most, or that stands for you as you think about your MBA experience. So I'll give you an example from my 6-word memoir, and that's making people's light bulbs go on. So for me as an educator, that's always been something important is bringing new information, new knowledge to folks. And sometimes that can be presenting them with new information like we're doing tonight. And sometimes it can be in coaching opportunities where I'm helping to draw out from people something that they may be doing or that they may have in their background, but they're not necessarily aware of it. So for me, that's my 6-word memoir, is helping people to have their light bulbs go on, making people's light bulbs go on. Wendy, what would yours be? If you had to put together a 6-word memoir, what would yours be?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. And so just so you know, people don't count my words because it may be a few more than 6. But my passion is connecting people to each other and to resources. So I think that's a few more than the task ahead of us. But bringing people together and having them learn from each other is really what I'm all about. That's my personal mission. And in one word, I can say it in one word, I'm a connector.
Mm-hmm. And it's so helpful that you can identify that and that you can break it down and articulate this, because I feel like once you've articulated it, that's really your North Star. If you identify as a connector, you identify as connecting people and resources, if I connected with being an educator or making people's light bulbs go on, that's your North Star. That's the thing that is not likely to change about you and about your values, even if other variables around you are changing. And you'll have other values too. It's not that that's the single thing that's that's going to be important to you. You'll have other things that are valuable as well, but some of those may shift, or they may move up in priority or down in priority just a bit. So what we're asking with this 6-word memoir exercise is that you try to identify the single thing that's perhaps most immutable about you, the thing that you really would stand for regardless of MBA, not MBA. Because that is then going to help you to, what it will help you to do is to orient, just like the North Star does. You'll be able to then navigate making difficult choices, deciding amongst things that you may or may not want to give up, based on how closely aligned it is with your North Star, with your most important sort of mission level value.
Mm-hmm. And the North Star is hard to hold on to because there's so many opportunities and distractions and things that come about. And so that having that North Star and sort of being clear about your core values will really help you navigate the experience. The other thing that will help you navigate the experience is making sure that you have some accountability partners or an accountability partner. It may be a friend, it may be a parent, it may be whoever it is who knows you the best and who understands what you're about and sort of what you're hoping to accomplish. And some people call it a personal board of directors, but having those people sort of as part of your team and accountability partners will help you sort of stay true to your values and North Star, because you're exposed to so much and it's really easy to veer off. And some veering is good, but veering off too far may take you away from really what you set out to do.
I love that concept, Wendy, of a board of directors. And, when you combine it, it's obviously very businesslike, right? We're asking people to develop a mission statement and to use that to feed into action plans and then to develop a board of directors. I really feel like taking those steps gets you in the right mindset so that the actions that you're going to take to prepare for your MBA experience are driven more by who you are, not what happens to be in front of you at the moment. You had a great analogy when we were preparing. You said that you want to do this kind of reflection now, because if you think about being in the MBA program as being in the water, you can't see your reflection if you're swimming.
So true. So true. So moving along, what can people do to prepare for the academic piece of their MBA experience? What can people do now?
Yeah, so there are a few concrete steps that folks can take on the academic front to help get prepared and to help to think about what kind of an environment they're going into. So for example, you may think about taking exemption exams if your school offers them. The exemption exams are typically, if a school offers them, they're to enable you to potentially test out of a required course or a core course. And there are pluses and minuses to doing this. I think the plus of being able to test out is, one, you don't necessarily want to be in a course that's going to feel like it's not at the appropriate knowledge level. So using the exemption exam, and if the exemption exam results push you into a different grouping, that may feel more engaging for you. The other prospect is that it can open up another spot for electives if you don't have to take the base level course. The one challenge that I would throw out to you all, though, and would say it's at least worth considering, it's not a slam dunk decision that if you take the exam that you should exempt out, is the more exemptions, the less time you have in classes with your cohort. Typically, your cohort is the group that you build the strongest bond with during your MBA experience. During required courses, you're taking those courses together in sync. You're working on projects together. So there is a cost to potentially exempting out, and so you do want to make a thoughtful choice. It's navigable, but I would just encourage you to think about pros and cons and what really makes sense for you.
Absolutely. The other thing I think that we wanted to talk about a little bit is grades.
Yeah.
Do grades matter in MBA programs, Michael?
That's a great question. And I think I'm not going to leave a cliffhanger like it depends, but it does depend, because everybody is going to put a slightly different value on grades. But here's what I would say that I think is a little bit more applicable across the board to folks. As undergraduates, chances are good, if you're watching with us tonight and you're taking part in this session, you're thinking about an MBA experience, you probably were a very strong undergraduate student. That just tends to be the groupings of folks that are looking at top business schools, as they had good, strong undergrad backgrounds. They're probably maybe a little bit type A, where you really worked very hard and got good grades. All of that suggests that going into an MBA experience, you would continue to put a high value on grades. And I don't think either one of us want to discourage you from that. But while I would never go as far as saying grades don't matter, what I will say is that I think the difference between undergraduate and an MBA experience is that your MBA experience, there are other things that matter, I would argue, at least as much as grades. And those would be your engagement in the community and building your network and putting together a good career plan and exploring your career choices. And all of this is going to take time. You only have a finite amount of hours during a week. So grades they're an important reflection of your mastery of material. That said, your MBA experience, at least in our experience working with MBAs by the thousands over the past decades, is most likely going to be satisfying if academics are balanced with community involvement and career planning and engagement. So there may be some trade-offs that you consider making in terms of how much of an emphasis you put on grades.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there's one more preparation piece that we wanted to talk about, which is sort of making sure you're familiar with data programs,
Mhm.
Excel. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those before we move on to the next topic.
Sure. Just like you can't reflect if you're in the water analogy, the other analogy here is arguably you don't want to be building the plane while you're flying it. And what I mean by that with regard to academics is that there are going to be certain tools that you need to be good with in order to navigate your MBA experience. So beyond the content of accounting and finance and strategy and operations and all of the other courses that go into an MBA curriculum, there are tools including Excel and potentially Python and potentially SPSS for Stata, or R or Tableau. There are tools that you're going to need to be at least familiar with because you're going to be using these tools to apply to the content in the MBA curriculum. The more you can do to familiarize yourself with these tools prior to starting your MBA experience, you, I think, will be relieved when you start. We've both worked with folks who had a limited familiarity with some of these. Excel is sort of the one that I can go back to because it's the most universally heavily used. And for the folks who really don't have a good foundation in Excel, it can be an incredibly difficult start at the beginning of your program because professors jump right in and they expect you to have a working knowledge of it.
That's
So
right.
I think the recommendation that we would both offer here is just take some time prior to your MBA program starting to make sure that you're familiar with at least some of the functionality. If you need to, you might consider taking a class. Many schools nowadays will actually do a diagnostic over the summer to get a sense for where your skill level is. But I don't think you need to even wait for that. I think you have probably a pretty good idea of where you stand.
Yeah, you don't want to sink before you start swimming. You want to start swimming right away. You want to jump in and start swimming and not feel so overwhelmed that it takes away from any other part of that experience. One other point I meant to make when we were talking about grades, and that is, well, we were the credit, the pass no
Right.
credit
Yeah.
option. So maybe you can talk about that, and I can make the point that I meant to make.
Sure. So just very quickly, you may do a little bit of research prior to starting your programs to find out if your academic program offers pass and what we'll call no credit, or what used to be called pass fail. We don't use fail language nowadays, but pass no credit. It's worthwhile exploring whether or not your school offers that, and you can check in with your student affairs office to find out about the grading structure. You can also find out about things like independent study and so forth. But I'd say that the pass no pass option is worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think one of the really important things about that and how it ties into grades is if you have the opportunity to take courses that are outside your comfort zone, I'm sure you know that you want to have a certain focus or assume you're going to have a certain focus, but you want to come out of business school as well-rounded as possible. And sometimes you can take a course that maybe would be a stretch that you wouldn't want to take because you would think it might affect your GPA and you want to maintain that. So that's where pass no credit, it gives you sort of a wide berth to jump in and explore something that may be a little bit more challenging and difficult for you, but you'll come out that much more well-rounded and be happy that you pushed yourself a little bit.
Yeah, the bottom line here is that the MBA experience is meant to help you to develop into a well-rounded leader in your chosen industry or function. And so by taking some of the risks that the grading system might allow for, and thinking broadly about where you're strong and where you want to develop further, you can put together an academic game plan for yourself that gets you to that goal of becoming a future potential leader.
Mhm.
So let's shift gears. Now that we've talked a little bit about academics, let's talk about our next area and sort of move out of the classroom and into the community. Wendy, could you talk with our audience about what it's like being part of the MBA community and how to navigate? There's so many choices that people are going to have. How do they navigate all of this stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michael. That is, again, one of the biggest challenges of your MBA experience is to engage in the community, get involved in clubs, go to conferences, attend group meetings, engage with alumni, talk with, do coffee chats with employers. The community experience is so broad and can be so exhilarating, but also overwhelming. And, going back to the balance piece, you know, I've known students who have color coded their calendars so that they're making sure they're in balance. They have a different color for like a social thing versus a academic or career management experience, so that, and working out and wellness and just sort of all those things that encompass your normal lives, and again, wanting to maximize the experience. And I will say that time is your most precious entity. You're going to be spending a great deal of money, but time is something that you can lose control of if you're not super careful. Um, and I would, advise you, and I don't know if you agree with me, Michael, that sort of making sure that you're considering all your opportunities, but also doing it in a very intentional way, because it's just so easy to become reactive instead of being proactive. And once you're in a reactive mode, it's very hard to sort of come up for air. So I would say intentionality is huge. It's very easy to kind of veer off and go in the direction that everybody else is going in, i.e., consulting, even if you have no desire. And trying to make the most of your student experience. Um, I think those are kind of the main things. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you. And that is, there's another great book by another, wonderful faculty member who's at Kellogg, who's also a former CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And it's called 187 Hours, which apparently is the number of hours in each week. And it's basically how to make sure that you're allocating your time based on your values. So it ties into kind of all the things that we're talking about. It's written by Harry Kramer. Again, it's 187 hours.
68
168.
hours.
Oh, yeah. Put a few more
Oh,
hours.
MBAs wish they had 187
You
hours.
guys are lucky. You have more hours or more hours in your week than Harry Kramer and most of the world does. So
I think it's just because they're multitasking, Wendy.
well, there you go. You're double. We're double timing.
That's right.
At any rate, another recommendation, and again, your cohort, the alumni, all the people that make up this, and also your sort of the administration, who is part of your community too, and partnering with academic advisors and the student life office and the career management, career services. All these people are really important of making your experience be as rounded and positive and sort of, again, what to make the most of your experience.
So that concept of multitasking and trying to fit some more things in is actually something that's come up for both of us in previous conversations. I'm curious what your thoughts are on whether or not folks in MBA programs should consider some kind of part-time job or an in-school internship. What are some of the benefits and drawbacks of doing that?
Yeah. Also, great question, and I'm really glad you asked it because it comes up frequently. And I hate to say this, but it really does depend. It depends if you are in a financial position where you need to have a part-time job, and that's part of your financial plan, then that's absolutely something that you may need to do. On a general basis, I wouldn't recommend it because if you have a part-time job or an internship during the time when you would normally be in school, it's taking away from your community time, your academic time, and sort of the overall student experience. So I would say, I guess the other time where I might recommend it is if you're making a career pivot and you're making a difficult one and you have absolutely no experience in that space. It may be that a part-time internship will give you that credibility that you need in order to make the pivot that you intend to make. What do you
Yeah.
think of that answer, Michael?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think I'm probably a little bit more flexible in terms of saying I think that folks can do it, but I think I'm with you, particularly in the first term.
Hmm.
I really feel like there's so much that you are adjusting to and pivoting to, and a goal of most, if not all, MBA students is to build their network, and that tends to happen most strongly during the first term. I think in subsequent terms, once you have relationships solidified and folks are not going to treat you as out of sight, out of mind,
Mm.
I think you may have some more flexibility, and it may depend. I think you raised some really good points about how exclusive a given industry or function is, and whether or not the way in is by building inroads and relationships through an in-school internship. So I think that there can be some logic in those circumstances, but certainly in the first term, my strong suggestion is I agree with you. I think focus on other things. Figure out how you want to put together your career plan rather than jumping right into tactics without really spending time on the infrastructure and the bigger picture stuff that you're doing during the first term.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So, no, go
Go ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say, expect some disorientation when you first get there. You're planning. You're coming. You've got a tight story. You know exactly what you want to do while you're at business school and after you're done. And I'd say try to be a little flexible in the beginning and be open to the unknown and be open to clubs and opportunities and careers maybe, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that you hadn't heard about or didn't know about. But you're drinking from a fire hose. That's just the way the um, MBA experience is. Um, but while you're drinking, try to drink in some stuff that you didn't know you wanted, before you settle in entirely. And I think you'll have a much uh, more satisfying experience if you can be open, but not too open. Because if you're too open, then you'll get overwhelmed. But again, just sort of managing expectations that there will be some disorientation in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty frequent story that we've both seen with students coming in. I want to go back to, the fact that folks are trying to integrate their community involvement into careers. Another major area that I think raises a question about integration is home life, and in particular, how students that are in an MBA program, how they're working with their families, how much or how little families are integrated. And I'd love if you could talk for a little bit about how you see family and partners or significant others fitting into the MBA experience, and what that integration looks like.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question because it is so important for those of you who are coming to business school with a significant other, or and a family, in some cases children. What I would recommend is that as you're making your decision about schools, you really want to ask yourself a few questions. The first one is, how integrated do you want your partner to be in your experience? And I think there's a really broad range from a student perspective. And then you have to ask your partner, how integrated do you want to be in my experience? Um, for many of you who have significant others, they may be uprooted as you are from wherever you're coming in the world to go to business school. And I'm quite sure you want to make sure that your partner, significant other, has a positive experience as well. And in many cases, they're going to be working, helping support you as a student. Some of them may not be able to work because of visa issues. And, all these significant others are just as accomplished in many cases, in most cases, as you are. And they're not used to being a plus one. So I would recommend that you understand what your school offers to help integrate partners. And there's sort of a wide range of services for partners depending on the school. So some of the questions to ask, is my partner allowed to sit in on classes? Some schools allow a significant amount of that. Some schools offer a limited amount, and some you may not even, that option may not be available. Can they join clubs? There are often partner clubs. I think most schools have partner clubs, but can they join affinity clubs and career clubs and social clubs? Can they travel with you on any of your travel experiences, assuming that we can travel again in the near future? And then you also want to know, are there resources for your partner to help them with a job search if they're relocating, they're moving to a place without a network, they don't know who the employers are in this space, they may not have ever done a job search, they may have been in the same job that they've had since they graduated from undergrad. And so having an understanding of what resources are available to them on that score. The Career Services Center at most schools, although they would love to help your partner, they don't have the bandwidth to do so because they're busy trying to help all the students in their who are looking for post MBA jobs and internships. One of the things that I did at Kellogg was I was the career resources for the partner community and did help them with career strategy, resume review, mock interviews, networking, sort of the whole range of services that Career Services does. And because I have recognized in the market that service is not generally available to most partners at business schools, I have a private practice where I'm specializing in, I like to call trailing partners, which is often the case for so now that we've talked about career stuff for JVs, Michael, maybe you can cover what people can do to sort of prepare for the career search prior to their MBA.
Sure. So there are, I think, a few things concretely that folks can do during the pre-MBA period to get themselves prepared for what feels like a sprint at the beginning of the program. Each school typically has its own resume template, and each of them will look slightly different. They will use slightly different fonts, slightly different margins, slightly different organization, same basic material. But you can get the template ahead of time. You can get that during the summer and reformat the resume. You can even take the resume that you used for your application and reformat it into the template. So why do you do this? It's for two reasons. One is that you will have the brand recognition that goes along with following the format and having your resume recognized as having come from your school. But more importantly, it really helps you if you've already done the logistical transition of reformatting your resume and having it in the right font and so forth. It's one less thing that you have to spend time talking with your career advisor about. You can really spend your time working with them on your career strategy, as opposed to that sort of fine tuning element that you can do more on your own and just ask them to do a quick pass on. So I'd recommend getting the template, your resume template from your school, and then formatting your resume over the summer. Another key step that I'd highly recommend that you take. Most top business schools use a self-assessment tool called Career Leader. It's a self-assessment that was developed by two folks in careers at HBS. And it measures interests, values, motivators, and skills. And it looks at those four elements in comparison with other MBAs who have taken the assessment and have gone on into different industries and functions. And so your output from this, the report that you get, gives you a reflection of your interests, values, motivators, and skills. And then it gives you a relative measurement in the form of recommendations for areas that you may be a potential match for. I use the term match, that's their wording, and I don't love that language. I don't think that an hour and a half assessment is going to be able to tell you what a match looks like. What I do think it's highly helpful, though, is that it can help you in the vast array of areas that you could spend your time researching. It will make recommendations that you could be a better fit for certain areas, and those are the areas that I think make sense to start with. Most schools that offer Career Leader are likely going to make it available to you during the summer prior to the start of your MBA program. So if you're starting in August or September, you're probably going to be looking for access to Career Leader sometime after June 1st. So keep that in mind. And if you can take that, it was really when we talked earlier about developing your mission and understanding what your values are, this is a key tool that will help you to really get that information together and to articulate it and to have it so that you can continue to refer back to it. One final recommendation that I would offer is identify alumni, whether through the school, if they make them available through the school, or through LinkedIn. Identify alumni that you might be able to reach out to during the period prior to starting your MBA experience, and ask them how they found their experience. Build your network and start to make inroads with some of the folks who can really be door openers and influencers for you down the road. You know, the kinds of questions, we talked about this earlier, like one of our favorite questions is to ask an alum, tell me, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting your MBA experience? Those kinds of questions really draw out their wisdom, and it gives you a potential starting point so that you're not starting from scratch. You're able to build on some of what they share and maybe use those recommendations, whether it's navigating, choosing courses, or some of the social activities that they found really helpful and valuable, to their own stories for how they connected with the alumni network. All of this stuff is really valuable information for you. So I'd encourage you to identify and reach out to some alumni over the summer and pick their brains a little bit. They're going to love being engaged with you. They are typically very altruistic folks that they really want people from their institutions to be successful. So the chances are really strong that they will make time to share some really good advice with you.
Yeah, and you know, there's something in it for them too, so you don't feel like you're, you know, bothering them. They love reflecting on their own experience. It's a wonderful memory. In most cases, it's a wonderful memory, and they love thinking about it and they love talking about it, and you will endear yourself to them, and they're just as anxious to hear about you and what your concerns are. And later on, if you stay in contact, kind of what your experience is, because it keeps them current. So, you know, it's a two-way thing. And my experience has been that alums generally love talking with incoming students, and students, especially if you have something to offer them at the same time, which of course you.
Wendy, any final thoughts about career preparation and goal setting as folks use this pre-MBA experience?
Want to maintain some flexibility, going back to the disorientation point that I made a little bit ago. You think you know what you're going to do, and you probably do, but just be aware that there may be some short period of time where you get confused, and that you're not 100% sure that what you wanted to do you want to do, and it's very normal to feel that bit of disorientation. So know that if it happens, and it happens, I think, to most people, just because it's such an overwhelming experience, and then the career search begins, and that's, can be very intense. And know that it's a very normal thing to have happen. So when and if it happens to you, you know that you're not alone. People may or may not talk about it, but Michael and I can both tell you that it's a very common experience.
I would completely agree with that. One piece that I would add to what you said, Wendy, is in my experience, and I think you would agree with this, tell me if you disagree, but there are very few ways that you can go completely right or completely wrong in the MBA experience. There's a lot of gray. And as a result, I think that it's important to remember that, particularly when it comes to careers, because I think that a lot of folks are very fearful of making a misstep and choosing a path that was the quote unquote wrong path. And that's just not been my experience. My sense of it is that as long as you have some guidelines, some mission that is driving the direction that you're going, that then the array of choices around, who you go to work for as an intern or what projects you take on and so forth. One path may be slightly more circuitous than another, but frankly, it's still going to help to fill a gap or to build a skill that enables you to continue on the path towards your long-term career goal. So I encourage you to not worry about being super linear. If your career path ends up being linear, then that's great. If it's not, that's great. Either can be really valuable learning experiences, but there's very few ways that you can really go wrong. And my hope is that takes some pressure off as you go through you thinking about your career plan.
It's a very important point, and should relieve a lot of people with any anxiety they have about that particular thing.
Right. That's our hope is that we want you to feel prepared and less anxious as you walk through the doors of your MBA experience. So hopefully you've been thinking about some good questions and putting them into the Q&A feature. We have a few minutes left to be able to take some of those questions and get at some of what's on your mind.
Yeah, so one of the questions here is, can you please repeat the name of the self-assessment test? Which we can certainly put that in the chat.
You bet. So it's called Career Leader. And it should be, as I said, if your school uses it, they would likely send it out to you, access to it, or sometime around early June. Now you can do it independently. I wouldn't recommend, that you go and spend your money on it. Most schools are going to make this available to you, but I do think that it is a very helpful way to start that reflection process as it relates to your career.
And one other question, which is kind of a big one and an important one, and I'm glad that it's being asked. In view of COVID and the resulting impact, lockdown, remote learning, less interaction between students, what can students do to minimize the adverse impacts on networking and job search?
What a great question. And my guess is that you all have navigated this and continue to navigate this in your own work, in your own businesses, as you work with colleagues and clients and cross-functional teams. There are certainly some trade-offs to being in a remote environment. If that ends up being the case where you're remote for your MBA experience, it will be a fundamentally different experience. It doesn't necessarily mean worse, but it will be a different experience in terms of the way that you connect with folks, and particularly as you build your network. Here's one of the silver linings that I've observed over these past, 9 months or so since we've been mostly remote, and that is that Zoom or Skype or WebEx or whatever platform you're using, it does enable a certain efficiency. And what I found in working with alumni and talking with employers is that they are seemingly, even though they may have, which I'm sure many of you have as well, Zoom fatigue, they also are actually pretty open and pretty generous with making time available, because they know that if you ask for 15 or 20 minutes, it's literally going to be 15 or 20 minutes. If it was in the olden days when you were doing coffee chats with them, it might be that you're sitting down with them for 20 or 30 minutes, but the entire endeavor from them walking down to meet you at the desk to walking to the cafeteria to get coffee with you and so forth, it was really more like an hour. So I have found that folks are more willing to make time available and to build network. One other thought, though, is that I do think that because it's at an arm's length, there's a little bit of an electronic barrier because it's screen to screen and not face to face. It does fall to you to make sure that you are keeping up the relationship with them. So, everybody is going to send thank you notes for, networking meetings, but you also then want to continue to follow up. You want to enlist them as a potential advocate, or maybe if it's a great relationship, a board of directors member that, like what you mentioned before, Wendy. But in either case, you want to make sure that you're keeping that person informed about your progress. You're letting that person know how they might have helped or influenced your thought process, and that you're keeping them on your team as you go forward. And I think that's especially critical when you're doing this screen to screen, because I think otherwise it's just too easy for them to go on to the next priority. So that is one encouragement that I think you can take, and one way that you can mitigate the distance that being remote causes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one other point, in the old world, in the world before, last March, aside from the time it took, the people were busier, right? I mean, we're still very busy, but there's not as many things as we can do. And so asking people for 15 or 20 minutes is different today than it was a year ago, because generally people have more time. So not only is it more efficient in some ways, you can hit a lot more people in a single day. You also have people that seem to have more time, and maybe you're looking for a distraction from their day to day, because everybody's day to day is, it's Groundhog Day or something like that. The last however many months we've been experienced this COVID active situation. There's a couple other questions I'm hoping we can get to. This is a big one. How can international students navigate the current labor market to secure a work visa?
Fabulous question. The good news, I think, is that more and more MBA programs are moving to either their entire program or some subset of their program having STEM designation in the US. And that makes it significantly easier to convince employers that a work visa is a good bet, because it potentially extends the amount of optional practical training from 12 months to 36 months. Now, I should say you can't guarantee that you're going to be given that. But just the fact that the STEM designation opens up that option, it does significantly change things. Now, I'm also not naive. I know that you aren't either. The last, several years have been a real challenge for students coming into the US from outside the United States, not only because of COVID, but because of some of the regulations that have been put in place with our government. And it seems like there is a bit of a sea change and a bit of a shift happening now. I think that there's going to be more to come, particularly in the next several months, as we kind of see where this new administration wants to go. But the early returns seem to be a greater openness towards skilled workers coming in from outside the United States, particularly with a high level of ability, like folks going to top MBA programs. What else would you add to that, Wendy?
I think those are kind of the two big game changers. That's happening very recently, and I think those are all positive changes. It's still a challenge, as it is, but as it has been. But I think that those particular sort of major changes, I think, is going to ease the way in a way that we haven't had for a long time. So
And
I think it's a positive, I think it's a very positive sign.
yeah, yeah, and we'll still run into elements. There are going to be industries that are more open to hiring a more diverse array of candidates, and they will go through the work of sponsorship because they feel like it's worth it. And there are others that either that seems like a heavy lift for them, or they just don't know how to go about it. They don't even know that it's an option. And so, I think that was true 5 or 10 years ago as much as it is today, where there are certain industries that you'll see have a greater openness than others. It's not to say that that's where people should focus. They should focus on the areas that they feel strongly about. And what I would say is you want to work with your academic and career advisors to be planning for how to enter that given industry, getting some guidance on how open your target industry is. And that's material you can even start researching during your pre-MBA period before you begin your program, just so that you know where to start the conversation once you enter.
Yeah. And I think, like with anything else, you want to have a plan A, B, and C, and sometimes D, because you want to make sure that you aren't boxing yourself out of, the things that you want to do. A couple other questions. One is, when do you recommend quitting your job for round two applicants? And do you think it's possible to get a pre-MBA internship? And how do you approach companies to do this?
I would love to give you a more definitive answer on the when you should quit. And I probably, if this was last year at this time, I probably would have had a much more definitive way to answer it. The truth of it is that with COVID and with people's earning potentials, just being so unpredictable at this point, there's not a clear-cut answer as to when you should leave. What I would say is, in years past, many people would prioritize either they wanted to try to volunteer or do some project work or travel. And I would have said in a different year that may be a helpful step to take, a good way to mentally and emotionally pivot from your former job to, I want to think about myself as an MBA, and I want to use this time to then pivot towards my post-MBA goals. Mm-hmm. Now, given the fact that you really can't travel very much, and I think that while employers may be coming a slightly more open than they have been in the past 6 months or so, I still think that many employers are very wait and see. I'd say that unless you have a specific idea and a potential connection to doing an internship or working on a project for somebody, I would say I think that it's probably helpful to stick with your job at least into the spring and put that extra money away, and use that to give yourself a little bit of flexibility. Mm-hmm. I think that as the economy continues to show signs of recovery, you may find as the spring goes on, slightly more openness from employers to potentially bring you in to work on a project or as a pre-MBA intern. But I think that it's going to look very different than it has in years past. And I think that you could probably get some more mileage out of the stability from your current role as much as you're able to.
Mm-hmm. Unless you have, a passion for a particular volunteer project, a mission that, you feel like this is a time when you can do something that, you've always wanted to do. And, there's certainly no shortage of people and organizations that could use help. But I agree. It is it's just a different it's a very different year. Hopefully it's going to be a different year for a much shorter period of time than last year was a different year. One other quick question, and then we have to wrap up, and that is, are there other resources to figure out what is important to you, like mission, values, some of the things we talked about?
Sure. So one of the elements that you can always take advantage of is you are welcome to work with us, and we can guide you through some of those conversations about how you would identify what's most important to you. Beyond Career Leader, there are other self-assessments that are out there that you're welcome to take a look at. So things like Clifton Strengths, where it identifies for you, as the name suggests, what your chief strengths are, and it sort of puts them into categories. What I found that's helpful about strengths is that it enables you not only to understand yourself, but when you see some of the other categories, it enables you to figure out people in work groups or colleagues. It enables you to ballpark where they might be strong and how that might be different from your strengths. It really is a great emotional and psychological exercise. Somebody that you may not get along with, and yet you know that they're talented and smart. Understanding the why behind it is oftentimes elucidated by assessments like Clifton Strengths. So it's another one that you might consider. But I think that Career Leader for guiding some of your career thinking and choices is most helpful. And talking through that with one of us may help you to clearly identify and articulate what's important to you and how you then start to build a plan around that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think that wraps up our questions for the evening, morning or afternoon.
We're so glad that you spent time with us today going through some of this information. And just as a reminder, if there are any questions that we can answer for you, feel free to reach out to us at fortunaadmissions.com. We've got some YouTube content as well for different subject areas. And if you're interested in chatting with Wendy, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly about how you might support your partner's career aspirations, we want you to visit wendymetterconsulting.com. Again, we're really glad that you could spend time with us. We wish you the best of luck in your journey, and we hope that you will continue to stay in touch with us and let us know what questions you have. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.